Hey folks, it's Don. Today on The Naturalist, I'm going to take a walk around Kiser Lake Wetlands State Nature Preserve. It's associated with Kiser Lake State Park in Champaign County, Ohio. So let's go see what we can see. In this part of Ohio, almost every walk I'm going to take is going to, I'll be discussing the glacial history of this part of Ohio. We're in west central Ohio here on a mid-September day in 2024. And so let's take a look at the map of where we're going to walk and just briefly introduce you to this area. So we're going to take a walk around Kiser Lake Wetlands State Nature Preserve. And this is Kiser Lake itself. I'll tell you more about that shortly. And then we're going to walk into Kiser Lake, which is the Blue Trail, Mosquito Creek Trail. And then we also will walk a little bit in the adjacent woodland here in what's called the Red Oak Trail, because some really nice trees, nice forest in there. And talk a little bit about the glacial history of this area and its, current management and those sorts of things. So let's just start down the trail. It's about a half-mile trail. The Red Oak Trail is about 0.7 miles, I believe. So we'll be walking about 1.5 miles today. This trail is part boardwalk and part just kind of dirt path, gravel trail. And we pretty immediately on the trail, we're near the road, the park road over here, but pretty immediately we get right out into the wetland itself. Okay, this would be considered a fen wetland. It's fed by springs that are coming out of the glacial moraine that's nearby. And so, but it does have a little flowing stream through it as well. And right off the bat, we see an interesting wetland plant I don't think I've talked about in this series before. It's called arrowhead. All right, so I mean you can see why it's called that. And here are some of the developing seed capsules of arrowhead. But that's an obligate wetland plant that you see in places like this. And here's one called Joe Pye weed, which we've seen recently with a silver-spotted skipper getting nectar from it. Okay, so that's a very common butterfly. Its larvae often eat native legume plants, native and non-native legume plants for that matter. But here it is nectaring on Joe Pye weed. Okay, again, a wetland associated plant. Here's the little stream that runs down through the middle of the wetland. We're just about 200 meters above where this little stream would flow into Kiser Lake itself. And I've walked through here before, and I've seen a muskrat swimming in this little stream when I was here before, which is always kind of fun. It'd be fun to see that today. I can certainly see that they're still in this stream. There goes frogs, lots of little frogs. But when you see little logs like this or rocks in the edges of ponds or streams where muskrats frequent, they often climb onto them to, do a number two. And so that little pile there, a little black spot, that's muskrat droppings. And so you often will see that on rocks or on logs on the edges of ponds or streams or what have you where muskrats frequent. So those are muskrat turds. I don't think I've covered those before in this series. So there you go, muskrat turds. All right, now, these wetlands, this fen, this area, again, has a rich glacial history. I've talked about several times in this series. There were glaciers through this part of Ohio as late as 11,000 years ago. And this wetland and the associated topography around here was formed by their action. And so Kiser Lake itself is kind of in a valley, surrounded by these little sloping hills, if you will, that are mostly moraines, end moraines of glaciers. where glaciers more or less carried and dumped their contents of gravel and rock and stone and dirt as they melted. And then occasionally big blocks of ice would break off and last longer and form large depressions, and those depressions sometimes would turn into ponds, and we would call those kettle ponds. And you know, some of those persist to this day in Ohio. I've looked at one called Stages Pond with you in this series last fall. But sometimes those depressions get filled back in with some of that glacial till and just basically form wetlands. And so the wetland to our left, which we'll get back to here shortly, is a wetland like that. There was a large depression formed by a big chunk of ice that largely got filled in by glacial till, but of course it's filled with spring water and supports a healthy wetland community. So this is a state nature preserve, and it doesn't require any special permissions to hike it, but that's its history. That's its glacial history. And then when we take our walk in the woods, we should see some of these geological features called kames, all right, which is just a big deposit of gravel and till where chunks of glaciers melted, and along with just the trees and forest itself. All right, just to my right as I'm walking along this little Mosquito Creek trail is Mosquito Creek. Okay, it's just a nice clean stream, and this flows into Kiser Lake. This is one of the main tributaries to Kiser Lake. And the area, the longer history of the area suggested that the valley where Kiser Lake now is found, and I'll get shots of the lake later, was just a boggy area, you know, filled with these fen wetlands and things. Mosquito Creek would have been running down the center of it. It was just known as a swampy, boggy area. And I think back in the early to mid 1800s, I think around 1840, there was a dam put on Mosquito Creek. I think to power a mill. But, you know, and it was used in that way for some time, and then kind of just was let go for some period of time until the state got a hold of it. I think now moving into the early 1900s, and they built a bigger dam and renamed it Kiser Lake State Park. And it's currently a really nice lake. There's a campground next to it. You can boat. There are no motors allowed on it, so that makes it a little different than a lot of the lakes in Ohio. Here's just another little peek out to the wetland along the way, and we'll get closer to that eventually. But so Kiser Lake's a real nice, peaceful state park in Champaign County. You can boat, you can fish, you can camp, you can hike these relatively short trails. So I'm in a pawpaw patch. Here's our friend Pawpaw. And pawpaws are in season now. They're ripening. They've been ripe in some places. I'm just sort of looking to see if I see any. And I don't in this particular little patch. But if I do, we'll sample one on camera if it's ripe. So this trail, again, it's part boardwalk. This is recycled plastic lumber. I'm walking on at the moment. And some wooden boardwalk. But here's where the portions of the wetlands water spill over into Mosquito Creek to feed Mosquito Creek. So this is just a little high spot along the creek that you know, just part of the trail system. But we'll get around here and get back out into the wetland proper in a second. What else can I tell you here? So we've had a very dry year. Things are senescing a little earlier, as I've mentioned recently. Although in places where it's wet, things are still nice and green, fresh. There's still plenty of water in this creek. Let's take a look at it. I see some fish out there, water striders. Something dug into the bottom of the creek right there. Could have been someone's dog when they were walking, not sure. But that's Mosquito Creek. It's running at a pretty good pace there. And again, fen wetlands and groundwater is a little more immune to droughts at the surface, which mostly affect things like, surface flow and reservoirs and things like that that rely on inputs from, atmospheric inputs. So today's still a warm day, mid 80s probably. Got a nice breeze. The asters are beginning to bloom. Okay, so there's a variety of asters, okay, that I'll point out, and I'll identify some of these for you. And some wetland indicator dogwoods, including gray dogwood, and this looks to be red osier dogwood with these very red stems. Okay, a real indicator of red osier dogwood, which is planted ornamentally because of that nature. There are varieties that have been selected to have extremely red bark. And those dogwoods also tend to turn their leaves very early too. So this tree is pretty far along in its fall coloration already. All right, so we're starting to get back out toward the wetland. Let's just keep going. This is a little high spot. It looks like the creek might have been dredged at one time. And this is almost like a little levee that was raised at that time. Here's another little input, sharing the wetlands water with Mosquito Creek over there. All right, here's going to be our turn now to cross the wetland proper. And this is pretty much boardwalk the whole way, along the way, as I recall. So, let's see what there is to see. There's a lot of things in bloom right now. Okay, here we've reached the wetland proper. We're going to cross it on the boardwalk. As you can see behind me, there's a lot of stuff flowering right now. And so I'll stop here and there and point out what I can and see what we can see on our way. So let's go. And I have to make sure I pace myself because there's so many things out here. I can't do them all. But I'll show you a few right off the bat. Here's a wetland associated aster. And again, a lot of the things you see flowering out here right now are in the aster family. The aster family has a lot of species that bloom in late summer and fall. And we're seeing that now. This one's called boneset. And the one cool thing about boneset is it has leaves that are penetrated by the stem, if you see that. Those are called perfoliate leaves. And so that's a species that really displays these perfoliate leaves very well. Very fuzzy with white flowers in these flat-topped clusters. So that's a wetland-associated plant called boneset. I think it was given that name because it was thought it could help heal bones if made into a poultice or something like that. So that's our first. Of course, we've pointed out Joe Pye weeds before. This is spotted Joe Pye weed. But I'm passing up something that's really pretty. And these really are fantastic this time of year. This is an aster. This one I believe is New York aster. It has kind of a look-alike called New England aster. New York aster tends to be a little bit more associated with wetlands than New England aster, which is found in drier places typically, and is a taller, bigger plant in general. So that's a pretty one. We have goldenrods blooming. This goldenrod, I believe, with very rough leaves, is rough-leaved goldenrod. And I will check on that and correct that if I'm wrong. But there's some of that out here, and then there's a real bright yellow flower out here that's flowering that appears to me to be a Coreopsis species. And it's yeah, it's very bright. It's all throughout the wetland in front of us. So those are some early highlights along the way. I have to keep moving. There's a lot of stuff coming out. Here's a little shrubby plant. This is called shrubby cinquefoil, potentilla species. So this is a wetland associated small shrub, has woody stems that are perennial. And this is one that you can buy and plant ornamentally as well. So it's a little shrub, shrubby cinquefoil. Got butterflies flying around. I see some of these are non-native cabbage butterflies. So they're pretty, but just plain white and not native. So they're really not supposed to be here. But yeah, it's a beautiful day. It would be really hot out here, but there's a really nice breeze. All right, so what else do we have? Well, here's a rose species. Those red fruits you see, you would call rose hips. This is probably swamp rose, which I will also correct if I'm incorrect about that, and that's a native plant. We have a plant that's kind of a look-alike, that's a real problematic rose, and that's called multiflora rose. That doesn't grow so much out in wetland areas. This is a little drier spot here, but I'm pretty certain that is swamp rose that belongs here. So we can kind of keep going. I see this one is in various stages of flowering and maturation. That's called swamp thistle. I also showed you that at Gallagher Fen. Really one of my favorite wetland plants. And the base of the flower here is sticky and it has a webby appearance to it. That makes it easy to identify, and it grows in wetlands, so it's swamp thistle. So this just kind of gives you the extent. There's no real standing water out here. There are little, tributaries to Mosquito Creek that pass through here, but it's just kind of a wetland, right? It's not a pond. So what else do we have here? We have some willows. Okay, over in front of me here are willows, which are a wetland associated tree. Some are shrubbier and some are large. Like black willow is basically a large tree. And then we have cattails, a few of them. Sedges of various species. Sedges are very abundant. These are sedges in front of me. Often Scirpus species is one example, or Carex species. Sedges are a typical wetland associate. All right, so lots of stuff, some grasses. Okay, so that's kind of what we're seeing here. And I will just walk a little further until I find the next highlight. Well, my next highlight didn't take long to find. I walked literally 15 feet, found another cool little plant I'd like to show you, and it's called white turtlehead. And this is another wetland obligate plant, and this is it. It's not particularly tall, but it makes a very unique flower that you can squeeze, and it looks like a turtle head, even with a little tongue inside of it. So that's white turtlehead, and that's a species that's the host plant for the Baltimore checker spot butterfly. So that tells you a little bit about its importance. That's a special butterfly, very colorful, pretty rare butterfly. And if you lost white turtlehead, you'd lose the butterfly. That's why these kinds of habitats are really important. Here's just some more of it. Okay, showing the spike of turtlehead flowers there on top. I'd love to see a checker spot today too, but I don't I doubt we will. There's some beautiful butterflies. They're hard for me to catch on camera because they, they move so fast. Every now and then I can get one who's stopped and is nectaring or warming up. But, all right, so I will continue this walk and pause again at my next highlight. I can't get very far in this walk without stopping again, so here I am 10 more feet up the boardwalk to our next highlight. And this stuff is called swamp lousewort. Okay, it's all along the boardwalk here, I'm noticing. So it's a really interesting kind of pale yellow, but with these creamy white flowers. See it here, all along here. So swamp lousewort, again, a wetland fen associated plant. Maybe I'll just keep this running for a while because I'm sure to run into other things. Just a lot more the coreopsis, sunflowers and relatives. Here's great blue lobelia. Really pretty bright blue, lavender, bright blue plant. Flowers this time of year. Also, we also saw that at Gallagher Fen. Obviously, these places that represent similar habitats will often have similar flora, but there's always some different stuff at each place, depending on how well the place was preserved or restored or what have you. So this is a very high quality, as is Gallagher Fen, but a high quality preserve. So yeah, to really maximize your bang for the buck in terms of interesting, unique, important species, the nature preserves, things called nature preserves in this state at least, are where you often find those things. That's where the best stuff is going to be found. Many of them are public, like this one. It doesn't take anything to come here and walk. Others are permit only, so you have to go through a process of permitting. And of course, there are private nature preserves as well, managed by different groups of various sorts. So you have to just go through with, whatever procedure the organization requires. Okay, we're going to enter the woods here, but before we do so, here's some more asters. Just lighting up the walk along the way. But we're going to enter the woods next, so I will be back with you shortly once I get some bearings, and we'll take a walk through that. Just a little map check. We are at K. So what we've done so far is I parked in this little parking area and took this walk through the woodland along Mosquito Creek, crossed the wetland, and we're now at the border of the woods. So I'm going to take this little jog and this loop through the woods, which is a little higher, and then make my way back to the vehicle. So let's go. I realized that right as you enter the woods from the wetland here, right in front of you is what looks to be a kame, K-A-M-E. And what this is a pile, you'll see as I walk around it, basically a pile of deposit left behind by a melted glacier. And this one's a fairly circular mound. Looks like it was a built mound, but this was left behind by the glacier. And again, it's filled with just the materials that glacier was carrying. Gravel, rock, some glacial erratics. I'm sure I'll show you those. So if you look at the path here, very like cobble and gravel. That wasn't put down by the park district. That's natural. That's natural gravel and cobblestone. So again, to my right here, this would all be the kame up here to my right. Okay, wetland down to my left over here. And so this is just a spot where the trail just circumnavigates this particular pile. And it's a good spot to see it. Okay, that little rise right up there, that's the kame. There's a nice blue ash growing on it right there. That's the survivor in face of emerald ash borer. We'll see more of those. Okay, you can really see the contour here. All these seedlings here, these little seedlings are blue ash seedlings. Okay, and these are going to be the future of ash trees in North America, as far as we know, in the face of emerald ash borer, because this species is not targeted very much by the beetle, and it also seems to resist it if it is targeted. So that's our best hope for a native ash tree species that's going to make it after the scourge of emerald ash borer, you know, does its job. Okay, so we're going to backtrack on this trail a little bit and get to the red oak loop. It's about I think a half-mile or more loop, and I'll point out some highlights along the way. This is a beautiful forest here. Well, I've walked some distance up the red oak trail, and it becomes pretty obvious why this is called the red oak trail, because it's littered with red oaks, which I'll show to you here in a second. But there's lots of other trees. There's lots of black walnuts here, white oaks, sugar maples, ashes, a lot of ashes in the understory, which I'll point out to you. It's filled with pawpaws. So let's just take a scan around here. So that's a whole pawpaw understory here under tulip trees. It's another one I didn't mention, tulips. Lots of red oaks here. There's a red oak. Okay. There's hickories in here, red oaks all around me. Here's a group of red oaks. There goes some deer in front of me. Spice bushes on the understory. And one thing that's always nice in these kinds of places, especially when you live and, you know, traverse around southwestern Ohio, west central Ohio a lot, is I don't see many invasive species in here, like amber honeysuckle or Lonicera macchii. That's the scourge of this area as well as in terms of invasive plant species. And I don't see it in here. And I don't know that there's been active management in this particular part of the park. I know that species is around this park, of course, but this woodland is really nice. Nice native woodland. These trees are, they're in the 100 to 200 year old range, I would say, at the oldest. I'm sure we could find a 200-year-old white oak in here somewhere. Again, there were previously large ash trees like white ash. I'm looking at a dead one right over there, but emerald ash borer killed most of those. But blue ash persist along with white and green ash seedlings. So, they may grow back for some period of time until that beetle would find them again. But the blue ashes have hope of hanging around. So let's just keep moving along here, see what other highlights we see, and I'll catch up with you in just a minute. I've talked about glacial erratics on this series quite a bit. These are these chunks of granite brought here and left behind by melting glaciers. So folks would pile up these rocks to get them out of the field, out of the way of row crops or pastures, and often pile them up. And so this is one sign that this land, even this looks like a native wild woodland, was manipulated by humans in the past, over the past couple hundred years. At minimum, of course, Native Americans have been here for thousands of years. But here's just a couple of these piles. So here's just a big pile of rocks in the middle of the woods here. And there's some limestone in there, but I see a lot of granite. All right, so these are just big piles of glacial erratics that previous landowners here would have taken out of their fields. Okay, so this is, all granite. You can really see the crystalline grain on this one. Okay, again, granite's used for gravestones and countertops and all those sorts of things because you can really polish it to a hard, smooth finish. And I see colors in here from gray, blue-gray to pinkish to greenish, all kinds of interesting colors. So this is, again, evidence that remains in a woodlot or forest like this that people have been here and have manipulated the land in the past, even if you Can't tell that currently. I'm noticing too that they tossed a lot of the smaller rocks onto a real big one. So there was a huge erratic there in the center that was just a big obstacle to them probably, that they weren't going to move. So they piled all the rocks on top of that since they weren't going to move it anyhow. All right. And in this vicinity, there's lots of nice trees. There's a really nice tulip tree right over here. Just show you up close. We've seen these countless times. At some point in Ohio, there's only so many species that you see. So yeah, there's a nice tulip tree. About 3 feet in diameter or so, probably 100 years old. And another one in front of me. So after we pass that, I'll let you go and then I'll rejoin you shortly. Stopping in front of this large red oak to show what's called a widowmaker. So this large trunk is completely suspended in air, and I believe it broke off the top of this tree and it got caught up there in branches and didn't fall. So right now it is teetering. I can see it moving a little bit in the wind. And so if you happen to be the unlucky person walking down this trail or standing underneath that thing when it decides to let go, you know, you're gonna be making a widow perhaps. So there's a widowmaker. These are the kinds of things you do have to watch in nature that are dangerous. Although people tend to get afraid of a lot of things that probably aren't worth worrying about. But, you know, every year that people are killed by that sort of thing, you know, in the woods, either during storms or even when, you know, it's just time for that thing to go. So I'm gonna get out of here and make sure I'm not making a widow today. Well, I completed my walk through the Red Oak Trail, seeing a lot more of the same. And so I'm gonna conclude this episode at Kiser Lake proper. So here you go, until next time, from Kiser Lake State Park in Champaign County. This is a naturalist, and remember, if you've gotten this far, you probably enjoy what you're seeing, I would hope. So feel free to like and subscribe to keep this thing going. Take care. Bye-bye.